Section 1 of Under the Guns, A Woman's Reminiscences of the Civil War, by Annie Wittenmyers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. My first interview with General Grant. A large army had been thrown in and about Cairo, Illinois, and General S.R. Curtis of Iowa gave me a letter and a pass to go down and visit the hospitals there. General Grant was in command, with headquarters at Cairo. Fortunately for me, I had friends at that point. The great hospitals were at Mound City, 6 miles above. I missed the boat that plied between the two places at irregular hours, and my friends proposed that we call upon General Grant. We found the modest, quiet, uncrowned hero busy at his desk, with his staff and orderlies about him. I was painfully conscious that I had no business of sufficient importance to warrant such an intrusion upon the man who stood between us and the army threatening that city at that hour. I had not thought of that before coming. But I felt very grateful to my friend, who came at once to my aid by explaining that I had come down from St. Louis to visit the hospitals, and was the bearer of a letter and pass from General Curtis, and that I also had a pass from General Fremont, and had merely called to pay my respects. We fell at once into pleasant conversation, and I found that the General was personally acquainted with friends and relatives of my own. "I will send you up to Mound City," he said. "Oh, don't trouble yourself. I can go up tomorrow," I urged. But he was writing an order, and soon dispatched an orderly with it to Captain Somebody. Immediately my pride took alarm. What if he should send me to Mound City on one of those screaming, whistling little tugboats? "Have you met my medical director?" he asked. "No, I have not met him," I was forced to answer. "I will send him with you," and an orderly was dispatched to command his presence. Directly the boat was reported as ready; and the General himself accompanied me to the boat, the City of Memphis, the largest and finest steamer on the Mississippi River. The General simply said, "Take this lady to Mound City, and remain till she is ready to return. Wait for the medical director, and till I leave the boat." So I was for a little space of time the commander of the biggest steamer on the Mississippi River. As I walked the length of that great boat, so rich and gaudy in tinsel and curtains and furniture, the patriotic blood coursed hotly through my veins. Why this extravagance? Why this pomp and display? And when the medical director, who was supposed to be in charge of all the sick and dying in that great army, came in full military dress, with gloves and sash and sword and spurs, my heart sank down to zero. But I was not long in reaching the truth and changing my mind. A dozen boats or more had just been impressed into the United States service, and lay there at the wharf with steam up. They had not yet been dismantled, and it was the kindly proper thing to do to send me to Mound City, and it was military etiquette for the medical director to dress as he did. I was afterwards on the same boat many times; once after Sherman's defeat at Yazoo, when there were 750 wounded and sick soldiers on board. General Grant was just gathering these boats and these forces that he might move on Fort Donelson. We honor our grand old heroes, by Annie Wittenmyers. We honor our grand old heroes who stood in the thick of the fight, where deadly missiles were flying and valiantly fought for the right. They stood with God in the conflict, they fought on God's side in the fray. The Lord and his angels helped them, and freedom and right won the day. Sacred to freedom forever is the soil where they fought and bled. No bondsman shall wear a shackle, no tyrant shall lift up his head. Above the flags of all nations our beautiful banner floats high, its stars like the stars of heaven, and its blue as the sky. Long may it wave in its beauty, the symbol of freedom and right. Not a star be lost from its azure, not a blot stain its spotless white. A boy sent by express, C.O.D. In the winter of 1862, just before General Grant moved upon Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, I went out to Sedalia, Missouri, with a heavy load of supplies. Sedalia is 188 miles southwest of St. Louis, and was an important military station at that time. The people in that section were very disloyal and belligerent. The train on which I journeyed was fired into 3 times the day I made the journey, by bushwhackers, men who carried an irregular warfare. The train was well guarded. There were at least 50 well-armed Union soldiers on board to guard it, who took turns on the platform, ready to spring off, gun in hand, if the train were attacked. But when a volley was fired into the train before the engineer could stop it, and the soldiers could get started in pursuit, the enemy had mounted their horses and were far away. When the second volley crashed into the train, a bullet passed through the window beside me and whizzed very near to my eyes. If it had come a little closer, it would have gone through both of them. Fortunately, I had just leaned back against the seat; for if I had been sitting in an upright position, as I was a few moments before, the ball would have gone through my head. A mother and her little girl, who was 5 or 6 years old, sat in the seat in front of me. The poor little child was so terrified that she tried to hide under the seat. Her appeals, as she lifted her beautiful tear-stained face, were very touching. "Do you think they'll fire again, mamma?" "I hope not, my darling," and the mother would tenderly cover her with the skirts of her dress and try to soothe her. "Oh, mamma, do get down on the floor. If you don't, you might get killed." It was pitiful to see a child in such terror crouching on the floor. We did not reach Sedalia till midnight, and it was not till the train drew up at the station that the child could be comforted. The next morning early I went into the nearest hospital. The building was an old, dilapidated frame structure that had been used as a store. Scores of wounded and sick men were crowded into these poor, narrow quarters. But it is not my purpose just now to speak of them, or of the hospital management, but of a child I found there. He was lying on a cot in a little back room. They called him Willie. He said he was "goin' on 8," but if he was that old he was very small of his age. His face was wondrous fair and beautiful, and his hair hung in golden ringlets about his head. He had been very ill, and was still too weak to leave his bed; but he was bright and happy, and a great favorite with the men who, lying on their beds, whittled toys for Willie with their pocket knives out of anything they could utilize for that purpose, such as sticks and bones. I took a great deal of pains to ascertain the facts about the boy. He was a fatherless, motherless child, who had followed the soldiers when they marched away from the town where he was temporarily staying. No one cared, and no one followed to bring him back, and so he went on with them. The simple story, as he told it, seemed to be sustained by the facts I afterwards gathered. "I wanted to go to the war," he said. "I had no mother, and I did not want to stay at that place. I did not like the people, so when the soldiers went to the war I went too. Some of the men said that first day, 'Little boy, you had better run back home.' But I told them I had no home, that my mother was dead, and that I was not going back; that I was going to the war, so they put me in a wagon to ride. At night I had no place to sleep. But a man who said he had a little boy at home, about as big as me, said I could sleep with him, and he hugged me up under his blanket. Then after that I had a place in a wagon, the colonel said I might. Sometimes I rode on the horses behind the big officers. But they wouldn't let me go to fight. They made me stay back in the wagon. I didn't like that. I wanted to go to the fights." A few days after I found Willie I was in the hospital, when a gentleman came in seeking some one. He was from Ohio. He happened to see Willie, and was wonderfully attracted to the child, and Willie seemed to take a great fancy to the gentleman. He came daily to see Willie during his stay in Sedalia. "This child," he said to me one day with tears in his eyes, "looks so much like my own boy, my only child, who died a few months ago, that I want to adopt him, if my wife will consent. But her heart is so nearly broken by grief that she may shrink from the plan." I told him that I too had taken a great fancy to the boy, and had determined that he should have a good home, and that through my friend, General Curtis, who commanded at St. Louis, I should hold the boy till the best of references were furnished. To this he made no objections; and as soon as he reached St. Louis he sent the very best endorsements, furnishing the most ample evidence that he was in every way worthy of such a charge, as he was a wealthy Christian gentleman. Dr. Irwin, acting medical director, readily concurred, and it was agreed that if, when the boy was able to travel, they wanted him, he should be sent. Soon after he reached home a telegram came. All right. Send Willie by express COD. Collect on delivery." When the contents of the telegram became known, there was great excitement among the patients. How could they part with Willie? And yet, as he was to have a good home, they rejoiced with Willie, who was delighted with the news that he was to go. As soon as he was able to travel, we prepared him for the journey. His name and address of the gentleman to whom we were sending him, were written in ink on white muslin, and sewed to his coat and jacket, and on the shawl we wrapped about him, and on the blanket we bundled him up in. A stalwart expressman came for him, and after giving a regular receipt for him, took him up in his arms to carry him away. Dr. Irwin and the surgeons of the hospital, and even the nurses and cooks, all came to bid Willie good bye. His farewells were very touching. When he was carried from his little room out into the main ward, a few golden curls lay out on the folds of the coarse gray blanket, and his laughing eyes turned kindly from one to another as they called to him, "Good bye, Willie! Be a good boy, Willie! Don't forget me, Willie!" As we were about to pass through the last doorway, Willie, who had said "Good bye" to each one as they greeted him, called out at the top of his voice, "Good bye, everybody!" There was a chorus of good byes in response; but an Irishman by the door was heard above them all as he said, "Good luck to ye now, and may ye live 100 years, and get into heaven afore the divil has a chance at ye." We accompanied him to the train, the surgeons and myself, and saw him safely aboard with his luncheon; and we stood together in silence as the train pulled out, for a vacancy was felt in every heart. A telegram was received a few days later telling us that Willie had arrived safely. A great deal was crowded into the next few months. Battle after battle followed. Fort Henry and Fort Donelson had fallen, Nashville had surrendered, the bloody struggle at Pittsburgh Landing had taken place, and the Union forces had taken possession of Corinth, Mississippi. But Willie was not forgotten. The gentleman adopted him as his own child, and his wife was greatly comforted by the presence and love of little Willie. A perilous ride. In digging the ship canal across the point opposite Vicksburg, hundreds of men were killed or wounded in the great trench. By long practice the gunners on the bluffs of Vicksburg acquired the ability to drop a shell into the great ditch, causing terrible slaughter. The heavy guns of the Union forces answered the enemy's batteries but failed to silence them. Whistling Dick, as we all soon learned to call one great cannon used by the enemy, kept the music going night and day. The loud, clear, musical whistle which accompanied every discharge won for that gun the attention of all. Whistling Dick was a gun of long range, and was effective in execution, especially along the canal. But one day, after a loud, sharp whistle, there was an explosion, and Whistling Dick was heard no more. The work of death went on, however, for there were other effective guns, and the most determined resistance to the project of the Union troops was shown. The wounded soldiers were taken to a hospital hastily improvised at a point just opposite Vicksburg, where, although more than a mile nearer the enemy with only the Mississippi River between them, they were nevertheless comparatively safe, being protected by a high embankment. I had been sending supplies to this little hospital with lavish hand. It seemed dreadful that wounded men should lie there night and day under the guns of two armies, the battle always on, the shriek and thunder of shell and shot over them and all around them, and shaking the very earth on which they lay. Weary, homesick, and suffering, they were isolated from the army and from all other companionship, except that of the surgeon and his force of detailed soldiers. But this surgeon, I have forgotten his name or I would mention it with the highest respect, was a thoughtful and kind-hearted man, who desired the best for his men and heartily sympathized with them. One day he came into my quarters on the sanitary boat with radiant face. He had thought of something which would please his boys, and that was that I should visit them. At first the thing seemed impossible. The distance was many miles. I could not go in an ambulance or on foot, and the dangers of the journey were appalling. But he had thought of all that, and explained the whole scheme. He could get a good safe horse, and I could ride on a cavalry saddle; and although there was some water in the canal, and the banks were steep, the crossing was entirely safe, and there were places where the horse could climb. I could not refuse to go to the men who had faced the cannon and gone down wounded and helpless to the gates of death for my country and my flag. General Cyrus Bussey, who was afterwards the Assistant Secretary of the Department of the Interior, and his plucky, lovely little wife, who is now among the glorified in heaven, volunteered to accompany me. Mrs. Bussey had her own horse and a side saddle. I had a great raw boned animal which looked as though he had been in several wars, with a good new cavalry saddle, which some officer had kindly lent for the occasion. "This horse is good and safe," the surgeon explained, by way of apology. "They say he wouldn't shy or jump if a shell burst just before him." The guns of 2 armies were screaming over us when we reached the point which our guide designated as the safe place to cross the canal. He did not know that some of the barriers at the mouth of the canal had given way, and that the water in the canal was several feet deeper than when he had crossed that morning. The tide was swift and turbulent; but the surgeon said cheerfully, "It's perfectly safe. Just follow me." The next moment his horse went down into the muddy, swirling flood, and, struggling heroically, swam to the opposite shore. The surgeon called back to us that he had missed the crossing, and designated a point a little higher up, which, as he said, was perfectly safe. I had misgivings, but, settling myself well in the saddle, gave the horse loose rein. He marched bravely in, and went down into the flood with a plunge. General Bussey, fearing I would be drowned, spurred his horse in after me, and the 2 brave animals struggled together until we reached the opposite shore. Thanks to my Kentucky training, I kept the saddle, and the only damage done was a good drenching. As General Bussey expressed a wish that Mrs. Bussey should not attempt to cross, she remained at a cabin near by, which was somewhat protected, till we returned. Reaching the embankment opposite Vicksburg, we scattered, the surgeon taking the lead. I followed about 50 yards behind him, and General Bussey about 50 yards behind me. The road was fair, and we flew over that stretch at a full gallop. My shaggy, raw-boned steed made good time. It was a wild ride. We were surrounded by batteries. The mortar boats of the Union Army, placed as near to Vicksburg as possible, were sending their uncertain shells thundering over our heads into the doomed city with deafening fury. The heavy guns along the heights of Vicksburg were answering the long line of batteries and heavy mounted guns on our side of the river, and only the river lay between us and the enemy's works. Shot and shells screamed over us. Sometimes it seemed as if the sky was torn to pieces above us, but my horse did not flinch. On and on we went in a full gallop. If a gun was leveled at us that day from any of the near batteries, we were not in range when the shot came over, and so we reached the hospital in safety. What shall I say of this hospital? What can I say of these wounded, suffering men? Language is inadequate to describe their condition. Longing for home and mother, for human sympathy, their moans were answered only by the guns. They longed for quiet and sleep, but the guns of 2 armies were thundering night and day over their heads. How could flesh and blood, brain and nerve endure it? My garments were still dripping, but I went from cot to cot to speak the words of cheer. The men tried to express their thanks for my coming in a befitting manner, but their "God bless you for coming" was choked with tears. As I saw those brave men lying there weak and helpless, and every nerve racked with the thunders of battle, I could not beat back my own tears. Indeed, as I live it all over again, and write of it, the tears will come again, although more than 30 years have rolled by since that time. I sobbed out as best I could, "God bless you, boys. Keep good courage. I will get you out of this if it is possible." The return trip was safely made. Again we swam the canal. Mrs. Bussey joined us, and we returned to camp. The next morning I called on General Grant, and reported the condition of these wounded men. General Grant was most thoughtful and careful of his sick and wounded. He took in the situation at once. Calling Rawlins, he said, "Those wounded men must be moved from the point right away. Send an order to the medical director to that effect." And that night, under the cover of the darkness, they were removed to hospitals at Milliken's Bend, 25 miles away from the belching batteries. A woman wounded in battle. A woman who had served as a private soldier in the ranks was severely wounded and taken prisoner at Chickamauga. She fell in a charge made upon the Confederates; and as the troops immediately fell back, she was left with the other wounded on the field, in the enemy's lines. As she was dressed as the other soldiers were, her sex was not discovered till she was under a surgeon's care in the hospital. She was wounded in the thigh. No bones were broken, but it was a deep, ugly flesh wound, as if torn by a fragment of a shell. A day or two afterwards, she was sent with a flag of truce into the Union lines. The sum and substance of the official message sent with this woman was: "As the Confederates do not use women in war, this woman, wounded in battle, is returned to you." There was great indignation in the regiment to which this woman belonged; and officers and men hastened to protest that, although she had been with them for more than a year, not one in the regiment suspicioned that she was a woman. She stood the long hard marches, did full duty on the picket line and in camp, and had fought well in all the battles in which the regiment took part. She was in the hospital at Chattanooga for some time, where I first met her. When she was able to bear the transportation, she was removed to a hospital at Nashville. I met her there again and again, and tried to ascertain why she had enlisted. "Had you a husband in the regiment?" I questioned. "No." "A lover or friend?" "No, I didn't know any of them." "Well, why did you enlist?" "I thought I'd like camp life, and I did." "You did your full share of the hard work, I am told, marching, going on picket duty, and chopping wood." "Yes. I was put on detail just like the others, and I never made any excuse. I was awfully afraid they would find me out, and then I'd have to go." "But they did not find you out?" "No, not till I was wounded. The most I care about now is that they won't let me go back." "Where did you come from? And what is your real name?" "I don't want to tell, and I shan't tell either." When she was able to sit up, the question of clothing became an important one. The surgeon said, "She must have women's clothes to put on." We women from the North, by gift and by purchase, provided the necessary outfit for a woman's wardrobe. To raise some funds for her, we had her photograph taken, first in the uniform of a private soldier, and then dressed as a woman. She sold them to soldiers and visitors for 25 cents each, and raised considerable money. I have the two I purchased, which I have treasured in my war album all these years. She was stout and muscular, with heavy features, high cheek bones, and her black abundant hair was cut very close. She was perhaps 26 or 28 years old, but when in her military rig, looked like a beardless boy. The time came at last when she must be dismissed from the hospital; and I was commissioned by the officers to find out all I could about her, and where she lived, as she had been more friendly to me than to the others. The interview was a long one. I can give only the main points. "The time has come," I said, "when you must be sent out of the hospital. Where do you wish to go?" "I'll stay in Nashville," she answered. "But you can't stay in Nashville. This city is within the military lines, and no one can come in, stay here, or go out of this town without a pass. You have come into these lines in disguise as a soldier, but you are now known. So if you will not go willingly, you will be sent out in charge of a provost marshal. That is, you will be taken under arrest by the government officers to Louisville, and left there. Then what will you do? You are not strong enough to do hard work, and I doubt if you could get any work there to do." "I'm awfully sorry I can't go back into the army." "You certainly cannot. The case is too well known; and recruiting officers have been warned, and will be on the lookout hereafter. If you will give your name and place of residence, the government will send you home, and the trip will not cost you anything." "If I tell you my name, and the place I wish to go, will you keep it a secret?" "I will be obliged to tell the officers." "Will you ask them not to publish it?" "I certainly will; and I will never tell it to any one, except the officers from whom I will get the order for pass and transportation." "I will trust you," she said, and she whispered her name and residence. 2 days after that she was on her way to her home in the Northwest. I never knew what became of her. End of Section 1.